Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, April 5th, 2021. Time for another show. It's Easter Monday. I found out it's Easter Monday, of course, here, but it's not as big of a deal. But apparently my NAFTA calendar says Easter Monday in Canada. It's the Monday after Easter, you know, here too. It's just, we don't do anything with it. Did we used to? Am I missing something? Did we used to have a bank holiday or something? Is that what the Canadians are doing? Canadians, let me know what's happening today. Why the NAFTA calendar feels it's important to note that it's the day after Easter for you in Canada. Maybe banks closed, day off work. I mean, it seems like a good day to take off of work. You know, like Big Miracle and everything. Take a second day. I don't know. But I guess we don't do that here. We don't love vacations the way everyone else in the rest of the world who's healthy and has a good approach to work does. We're hustling back, I guess. And, of course, it's another opportunity to point out that Eastern Orthodox observes an entirely different thing, which I imagine is probably rooted somewhere in the historical adoption of a different calendar, but I haven't looked it up. But it gives us an opportunity to say Happy Easter again, I guess, next month, if we can remember to do that. We need more pressure from the Eastern Orthodox folks listening. One, to remind us to make note of that next month, and two, probably at some point, you will ask me to stop making these references to Eastern Orthodoxy. I don't know. I just find it interesting and somewhat amusing, and if it was true of all holidays, then it would really be fun and entertaining, because if you forget and you miss one, like, I can't believe you forgot our anniversary, honey. Oh, sorry, I was waiting for our Eastern Orthodox anniversary next month, or something like that. You'd be able to get away with so much more. But only insofar as there aren't enough Eastern Orthodox listeners taking offense, which perhaps at some point they will, and at which point we will apologize, but then do it again a month later and probably ruin the whole apology. Anyway, we're here and on the air and ready to go. Lots to round up from over the weekend. I guess probably the biggest story from over the weekend would have been was it the New York Times or Washington Post? I'll look it up. It's in pocket. Revealing to all of us, New York Times, revealing to all of us what we probably already knew about Donald Trump, which was that he was largely stealing money from all of his donors towards the end of the election. Well, I mean, really, if you were donating to Donald Trump, you were basically being stolen from all along. And you should probably grasp that. Remember, of course, when he first declared his candidacy, the whole idea was, well, we won't all have to pitch in to support this guy because he's a multi-billionaire and he'll simply pay for everything himself. And instead, of course, he stole the money the whole time through, and he never had it in the first place. Very interesting story. I'm sure we'll get to the details of it at some point later on. Greg Dworkin will be here to bring you details of not only that, but many other stories that happened over the weekend, or we only found out about over the weekend. Bill in Portland, Maine has us launched with today's morning tweet. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Kagro X says it's Easter Monday in Canada, and I did say that, and it's true. They do things a little different there. The Easter moose hides the poutine. That could be the reason. The moose moves, I think, generally speaking, a little slower, although I have seen some mooses on video anyway. It's really trucking through the wilderness, so they can move, but they look like they're taking their time, and maybe that's what makes it. And poutine's just that much sloppier, I think, than the egg thing. Then a hazmat crew is called in to find and carefully remove it. That's true, too. Have you ever dyed actual Easter eggs and then forgotten where you put one? I've heard stories about that from a lot of people, and having a rotting egg somewhere in the house, no joke. Usually I would imagine that would lead you to find it, but we've had plastic eggs with things in it that I guess you wouldn't want necessarily rotting around the house. I think we've lost track of them at some point or another, but in many cases, because it's a spring holiday, some of those eggs are outside and it doesn't bother us quite as much. I suppose, when that happens. So, all right. Well, you can call in with your or text or tweet or email or whatever your fun stories of things you have hidden and lost on Easter, if that's been your experience. Let's see. Oh, Greg's ready to go here. Oh, and good thing, too, because I didn't test Skype this morning as I was preparing things. So can you believe it? The technology just worked all on its own as it's supposed to every day. Congratulations to them for that. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. So I have to tell you my favorite Easter story.
All right.
Which is that back in 2018,
yes.
There was a strike at the Peeps factory.
Was there? Wow.
And Peeps are unionized. So they won their strike. And they won their strike on the basis of, I think, their striking chant, which is no justice, no peeps, and it worked. And so I smile every time I remind myself of that story.
Yeah, okay, that's a good one. I think I might have missed that story the first time around. Certainly the strike. I don't know. That it will be hard to detect, I think, in my house, but
yeah, just like peeps, never get stale, right? Because they taste better when they're stale.
I think so too.
Anyway. Yes. I had actually a ton of stories to do, and we won't get to all of them. I even gave you 2 abbreviated pundit roundups this morning, the one on Saturday and the one on Monday, because they're sort of related.
Okay.
And, the big story, of course, is not so much Donald Trump scamming everybody, which everybody sort of knew. I actually saw a statistic that somebody was claiming that about 3% of all credit card fraud in that year was Donald Trump.
Yeah. Pretty amazing, something fraud. Yeah, I saw that statistic too. I think they decided that something like somewhere between 1% and 3% of various banks' fraud departments the time was spent on it. So it's a little iffy, but it's a lot of fraud.
Yeah, it's a lot of fraud regardless, and of course not surprising. And there's I saw other statistics that not statistics, but comments and punditry. Based on polling, that still 50-60% of Republicans don't accept January 6th was violent, or they still believe the election was stolen, or they tell the pollsters that because screw you pollsters, it's really hard to tell. But, that's relevant in the sense that the real story is, depending upon your point of view, the ongoing Derek Chauvin, George Floyd trial with the background of what's going on in Georgia. Yeah. Or what's going on in Georgia with the background of the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin trial.
Yes, right. Oh, and by the way, I mean, we got to adopt some language for this. I mean, everyone knows it's George Floyd's murder that's being prosecuted. Derek Chauvin being the accused murderer in all of this, but. I find that sometimes.
But more people know who Floyd is.
Yeah, that's so we adopt that kind of shorthand.
It's hard to. But the other part of it that I think is relevant is that many commenters have pointed out is that the prosecution, is trying Derek Chauvin for murder.
Yeah,
and the defense is prosecuting black people
in general
for their attitude.
I see.
So
make them so popular.
The entire black community is on trial because the defense's whole strategy is: look, the cops were trying to do their job, and it's unfortunate that he was killed. But with all of those mobs of 3 or 4 people, who obviously were angry, and because they're of color, obviously superhuman, the cops had no choice but to be scared, and that distracted them from doing their job.
Right. I forgot that they were kneeling on him, I guess.
Something like that. So there's supposed to be even more compelling, in addition to the compelling issues that were going on. Like, everybody has said that this is wrong, and I'm talking about people who are testifying.
Yeah. Whether
it's the cops or, firefighters, EMTs, paramedics who happen to be in the area trying to tell the cops it was wrong, the cops telling the cops it was wrong. So obviously everybody still thinks he'll go free.
Not much you can do about the history,
America, right? So
everyone's
worried. Guilty, but whether or not he's convicted, that remains to be seen.
Yeah.
But that's the background to everything. Black Lives Matter, and then culminating in Trump losing, and then Georgia deciding that it's unconscionable that they lose power, so they have to jigger things and unbalance things and MacGyver things such that Republicans have a better chance at the next election and Democrats don't. And there's been a lot of anger and actually exaggerations on both sides in terms of what's really in the Georgia law, all of which I think kind of missed the point. You can't give food or water to people within 150, yards or miles or
feet or inches,
hectares or whatever it is of the voting area by poll people, But third-party people could still do this, and there's places like New York that have even more draconian laws about this. And so Georgia says, look, you're exaggerating what we're doing here for your own political purposes. Again, kind of missing the point. The New York Times has a pretty good breakdown of what's actually in the Georgia voting law,
yes,
including changing the law so that Brad Raffensperger and the Secretary of State doesn't have as much control over it, and that the legislature can implement things to ameliorate problems in individual areas much easier. See, the problem here is not the language or not the law, but the intent. The whole idea of the Jim Crow era is that if you look at the laws out of context, they don't seem that bad.
Yes,
the problem is that when you only apply them in a certain way as to disenfranchise people, then the intent matters way more than what the language of the law says. The way I interpret this is that you white people are fine, but you black people haven't met the standards that we have right here in the law, which is totally neutral, but I'm the one interpreting it. And so you guys over there are fine, and you guys over there are not. That's the problem with the Georgia law. So there's no assumption, and there can't be, that somehow or other this is a neutral thing that people are misconstruing. It's not like the Republican Party in Georgia consulted with the Democrats and decided that they were going to try to get some sort of acceptable to everybody sort of thing.
Yes, I don't believe they've reached across the aisle to
I don't believe they did, because
the other side.
It goes back to the Pennsylvania voter ID law. Voter ID on paper sounds fine. Virginia, as you've pointed out, does it okay. They send IDs to everybody. What's the big deal?
So
in Georgia, as somebody pointed out, there's actually two numbers on the license, and if you send the wrong one in, then your vote is invalidated, or your request for an absentee ballot is invalidated, because now they want you to provide your license before you get your absentee ballot. I mean, if it's reasonable, fine, but if your intent is to disenfranchise people, you can find ways in the law to do so.
Yes.
And again, the problem here is the intent is not kosher. The argument here is not a argument being made from a fair-minded, neutral decision. And so you have neutral, fair-minded conservatives saying, you're making too much of the law. Well, we're not making too much of the intent. That is so clear. It goes back to several years ago in Pennsylvania, when the local Pennsylvania Republican politicians said, this voter ID thing is wonderful. It's going to win this state for Romney. Yeah. That's their intent.
Right. Or in North Carolina, where they left notes behind saying.
Right. And you can't have a fair discussion about what's going on here if you leave the intent part out.
True.
And that, to me, is the whole, issue with the whole entire Georgia situation here. The cops are on trial. And on paper, cops don't have any more or less rights than anybody else when it comes to trial. It's the same law, and the law applies to everybody. In practice, cops go free if they're white and they kill black people. That's just been the history. And so you can't take that out of context and say, well, let's ignore that and let's just look at the law.
No, it doesn't make any sense. And another layer I would add to it, of course, is that it used to be the relatively universal recognition that there were certain states that just had a history of passing these things that are meant to look facially neutral but had this malign intent. as you pointed out, and it was demonstrated through their history of actually executing these laws. And there was a whole section of the Justice Department created in order to keep an eye on it, and the voting rights section would have would basically have the opportunity to make a first pass at these laws as they adopted them, and say this one or that one is, even when it looks facially neutral, we understand the way in which this will be applied, and we object to their holding federal elections under this law. And then, of course, the Supreme Court decided, well, we're well past the time when a state legislature would adopt such a law that was facially neutral but racially discriminatory. We no longer need to have the Justice Department have the ability to invalidate these things ahead of federal elections in order to ensure fair voting access. We're post-racist now. And, now, gee whiz, the minute they remove this ability of the Justice Department to step in and say this makes no sense, they're right back at it, which I guess only proves that I guess we weren't done with it after all.
Yeah, I guess we weren't wrong to pass it in the first place.
Right.
So Ed Kilgore, writing in New York Magazine, Georgia Republicans working hard to sabotage a 2022 comeback. All this obnoxious activity was obviously the product of Trump's election fraud claims, since there was no documented cases of problems with Georgia's 2020 elections other than the aforementioned long lines. So the Georgia GOP was very conspicuously exposing itself as doing bad things in a bad cause. Eventually, legislators took out some of the most offensive pieces of the final election bill, but they had so mishandled it at all that nobody noticed and nobody cared. As Kemp went on camera to spin the legislation he was about to sign as a triumph for voting rights and election security, a black legislator tapped on his door to see what he was doing, was promptly wrestled out of the Georgia state capitol by white state troopers and charged with 2 felonies. I mean, that's basically what's going on here.
Well,
and so then you had companies, Delta and more recently Major League Baseball, say this is unacceptable and we're doing stuff. And that's true in Texas as well, with other companies getting upset. So now conservatives are all upset about woke companies. And, it's all part of the same thing here.
Yes.
Not accepting that they lost and not accepting that the majority of voters aren't voting for them. And so they have to change the laws, change the rules, because if you can't play fair and win, then you have to play unfair and win. And that's what's going on here. And as a justification, then they turn to culture wars, because, again, that's all they have. Yeah. And, again, this is in the background of Biden doing decent things on the pandemic, not ending it, but, doing the right things to help mitigate it, and doing the right things on infrastructure, which the Republicans will not vote for.
Right.
And doing things that make the tax breaks a little bit more fair. Obviously, there's going to be winners and losers there, and you can always point to some codicil in, page 1972 that gives a tax break to somebody who doesn't deserve, But overall, a good thing. Republicans can't get on board on this either. And so they have nothing, and therefore they have to turn to culture. And this is summarized, interesting, by conservative Josh Grashower in National Journal. It's anything but the economy, stupid. The president hopes that a strong economy fueled by his policies will lead his party to victory in 22. Narrator, it will.
Yeah.
But that's a misreading of our political moment. And he's got a picture of the Cat in a Hat and Dr. Seuss, and goes on to make the case that during the Trump era, culture eclipsed economics in American voting preferences, and it wasn't even close, which is completely wrong. The reason that Trump wound up winning Latino Hispanic voters is because they needed to get back to work, and Crashour's an idiot.
Oh.
I mean, we talk about this on the show ad nauseum. The reason that they didn't win was culture issues. Generally, Democratic voters said, I understand what's going on here, but listen, I have a job. I don't have that much money. I got to get to work to pay for stuff for the family. The pandemic is threatening to close it down. Republicans are saying open up. On this particular issue, I'm voting with them. That's an economic issue, not a cultural issue. And Crashour makes the claim that culture eclipsed economics. Not what happened. Even as the economy roared, Democrats still voted House Republicans out of office in the 2018 midterms because of their antipathy to President Trump. And despite the tumult caused by the pandemic, he says, Trump actually gained ground with non-white working class voters in last year's presidential election, except I just explained to you why, which he doesn't understand. But Biden's focus on getting money in the pockets of the very working class Americans most resistant to his message is a bet that our politics have changed with Trump's departure. Again, that's not what he's doing. He's certainly going to try to get whoever marginally isn't all that, partisan about it. And if you think of people who get the vaccine, people who don't get the vaccine, and then there's the vaccine hesitant, there's people who will vote for Democrats, there's people who never will, and then there's the hesitant who really aren't sure what they're going to do from election to election because they're not at all ideological. They have left-wing views, right-wing views. The typical swing voter is in the middle because their left-wing and the right-wing vote attitudes balance. But just as in the last election, the economy and needing to open up was what drove whatever Republican votes there were to be had in that group. Biden will make inroads in that group. And the fact that he won't pick up the people who were never Democrats, if you will, doesn't matter. That group is never persuadable, and you always have to outvote them. He's not going to convince evangelical Republicans to vote for Democrats. They'll take the check and vote Republican. They've said so.
Yes.
They've said it's not evil. It's not the devil. You can go ahead and take the check. We're still voting Republican. That's fine. You're not trying to convince them. And so if you go to them and say, look, they haven't been convinced, that proves my point, you're just doing it wrong.
All right. Yes. And by the way, you win praise from Mad Hatter for your crowning of Josh Kraushaar as king of bad takes. So,
well, he's got some good ones. The thing about Kraushaar,
but he's
and
the king of the bad ones.
We talk to each other online all the time. You can persuade him if you give him data, but in the absence of data, if you don't talk to him, he'll just go off on this. This is obviously the key. I mean, not just Kraushaar, but all of the culture conservatives are betting that Kraushaar is right. The cat in the hat matters way more than the economy.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Okay, fine. You go with that.
I guess so. I'm just use this as evidence. The fact that they're so quickly dropping the potato head angle on all of this seems to me like they know they're wrong. This looks
well.
ridiculous.
Even they know they have nothing. They can't go on the economy because it's not theirs. They can't go on the pandemic because that's a disaster. They can't go on morality because Trump's a fraud and Trump's a 3%er.
Yeah,
3% of all the fraud.
Right? Yes, true. Right. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that connection as well. There's a lot to it. And by the way, someone threw that in there. There is another connection, just connecting the first two stories there. One, my summation of what a lot of people keep pointing to as the worst part of the Georgia bill is, of course, the ability of the legislature to step in and just change the results. But shorthand, it legalizes Trump's phone call to Raffensperger after the fact. Now, when a Trump calls a Raffensperger down in Georgia and says, I need you to find the votes, and if that means firing the Fulton County Election Board and replacing it with people who say, look, I found votes, you can go ahead and do it. Not only is it legal for them to do it, but you should remember that, it wasn't that Brad Raffensperger was a great humanitarian or anything. He felt like he was constrained by the law in not being able to do what Trump was looking for him to do. Now the law says, you're not constrained, Brad. It can happen. You don't, and in fact, we can do it without your help.
In fact, says it's not even up to you anymore.
Yeah, right. So you don't have to stand in the way. You can't stand in the way, and we can remove you from standing in the way. But yeah, all it does is, one of the big problems with the bill is that essentially it legalizes his attempted election theft by making it legal for the Republican legislature to become his accomplice in finding those votes and it being perfectly legal.
But that's the thing. And so that is at the heart of what's wrong with the Georgia bill, not the provisions about whether or not you can give water to people.
Although that is also
which in Florida, Derek Jeter said we're giving water to people. I don't care what the law says.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are ready to try that in Georgia as well, and they'll likely, in the end, prevail, and that's good news.
Right, we'll give Gatorade. They didn't say anything about that.
Oh, true. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I think it might have said food and drink, but it's hard to say for sure whether Gatorade is really either of those things. Yeah,
it's a balanced electrolyte solution.
Oh, yeah, right. Plants crave it. Everyone needs this.
So this is from the New York Times, page 8 of the law. There is created a state board to be known as the State Election Board, to be composed of a chairperson elected by the General Assembly, a partisan group, I would add,
yes.
An elector to be elected by a majority vote of the Senate of the General Assembly at its regular session, and an elector to be elected by a majority vote of the House of Representatives of the General Assembly at its regular session in each odd-numbered year, and a member of each political party to be nominated and appointed in the manner provided in the Code. No person, while a member of the General Assembly, shall serve as a member of the board. And the Times says this is one of a few provisions that strip power from the Secretary of State. So Raffensperger isn't like you can't follow the law. It's no longer up to you.
Yeah.
Secretary of State's not involved. It's been replaced by the state election board.
They're taking no risks with him. That's true. Well, all it does is allow them to bypass. Well, it was an interesting way of tailoring it, but they basically said, what if we get another Brad Raffensperger in there? All right, well, how about instead of administering elections, the Secretary of State does nothing?
Well, but here's the key. Again, talking about it looks neutral, but the Times says the law dictates that the newly created chair be nonpartisan, but the position is appointed through the partisan legislature.
Yes.
Right?
Don't you
be
partisan.
Let's appoint a nonpartisan judge like
Roy Moore,
who was previously a Republican operative.
Yeah, well, you can do that, and as long as that person says, hey,
but
I'm
he's
nonpartisan.
Not a Republican operative now, so obviously it's nonpartisan.
Right. Yeah, we appointed him because he'll be willing to say, I'm nonpartisan. I'll do whatever Republicans want, but I'm nonpartisan.
Exactly right.
Okay.
That's why intent matters.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin still with us. We've had our first segment of yelling about the Georgia election law.
And we're not done.
No? Got another one. Okay, very good.
Well, again, this is from the New York Times. People need to understand what the bad parts of the bill are.
Okay.
The Secretary of State, well, it's a law now, so I guess it's not fair to call it a bill. The Secretary of State is removed as a voting member of the State Election Board.
Why would he be
the Times points out that's a more direct attack on the powers of the Secretary of State. Viewed through the lens of the 2020 election, this could be seen as a revenge for Georgia Republicans against the current Secretary of State, Mr. Raffensperger, who would not capitulate to Mr. Trump's demands to overturn the results under a false banner of fraud.
Yes.
And then the next segment,
before you go on this one, I want to just point out common thread here. How many other states have we watched Republican legislatures remove powers from newly elected Democratic governors? When somebody they don't like falls into is elected to an office that has a certain power and they exercise it, the very next Republican legislature removes that power. This is a very strong pattern.
Intent matters. And then the GOP-led legislature is empowered to suspend county election officials. They may suspend county or municipal superintendents and appoint an individual to serve as a temporary. Such individuals shall exercise all the powers and duties. At no time shall the state election board suspend more than 4 at a time.
Don't go crazy.
Well,
how many are there?
As the Times points out, another power play by Republican state lawmakers. Tensions have long simmered between state and county election officials in Georgia, particularly in Fulton County, largest Democratic hub in the state, where officials say they've been targeted and deprived of support by Republicans at the state level. Election officials in Fulton County, for their part, have had their historical shares of mistakes and mismanagement. Now the state election board, newly influenced by the partisan legislature, will have the power to suspend county election officials. That part of the new law alarmed some Democratic legislators who noted it could particularly affect counties like Fulton, which contains 15% of those in the state who vote Democratic. The law does state that the bar for suspension is high. And this is the thing that Republicans are hanging their hat on. Oh, it's not as bad as you say. You're exaggerating, because the law does state that the bar for suspension is high, either a minimum of 3 clear violations or demonstrated nonfeasance, malfeasance, or gross negligence in the administration of the elections in 2 consecutive elections. And then the state election board would name a temporary replacement. You see, you have those guardrails. Okay, well, who decides whether it's demonstrated nonfeasance, malfeasance, or gross negligence? The state Republicans are already mad at Fulton County and claim that they steal votes, and they've done that for years. Right. So who's to say they can't just say, yeah, it's not just this election, it's the last 9. So you qualify, you're out. Yeah. I mean, who says?
I mean, I guess.
Who says you can't?
I guess there would be judges who supposedly would be able to do that, but
nonpartisan judges, sure.
Well, and they would have to do it, 2-3 years after the fact. Oh, okay. Well, for now, you're replaced as we count the votes. By the time, your appeal comes around, well, the votes have been counted. Oh, gosh, we were wrong. All right, you're reinstated. Next.
So here's a perfect example. Let's give you this hypothetical. On paper, this seems reasonable with guardrails, and in practice, it only affects Fulton County.
That's weird, isn't it?
Isn't that odd? Again, the whole thing about Jim Crow is that it sounded okay until you actually go ahead and do things with bad intent. And if you have bad intent, then it doesn't work. And by the time you get around to saying, like you pointed out, well, this is wrong, it's too late. And so, that's why Democrats are upset about this. And all the distractions about, this is just liberals trying to exaggerate about the law is nonsense and bullshit. Yeah. And that's why Brian Kemp came out and said, well, we did what we did because it was the right thing because it's election integrity. Sure. Yeah. In other words, you're talking about Fulton County and stealing votes that never happened because voter fraud does not happen. And so they bought into the Trump lie. And once you're into the big lie, you can justify anything you think you need to because we're just protecting the integrity of the election. What they're really doing is protecting their own power, and they're lying about it. And companies didn't go for it. So Major League Baseball pulled out. Kemp got upset. And then that led to the whole cascade of Republicans saying, oh, well, this is going to win us the next election because everybody knows something.
Everybody knows that hating baseball is a winning formula in America.
They're betting that there's as many racists left to come out and vote as they themselves are. And therefore, they'll still win. And I just, for no matter what happened in Virginia, the macaca state that all of a sudden wasn't anymore, no matter how often something like that happens, they still don't get it.
I don't know.
Again, that brings up the Derek Chauvin trial and how the country, in fact, glacially and too slowly, but in fact is changing.
Yeah. Well, we will see whether they're able to execute this strategy of winning over culture war voters by boycotting Major League Baseball, National Football League, the NBA. Who else are they boycotting these days?
I don't know, golf, bowling, you name it. So 538 has sort of a codicil on that, a sideline curling that is worth following in terms of how this plays out in real life, or unintended consequences, you might call it. Why the recent violence against Asian Americans may solidify the support of Democrats, by Michael Tesler.
Okay.
Political scientist. Even before the coronavirus became a worldwide pandemic, some astute observers of racial and ethnic politics feared the emerging outbreak in China would lead to and was contributing to a rise in anti-Asian sentiment in America.
Yes.
Right? I was one of those astute observers. I told you way on. There's a reason why the WHO tries not to characterize viruses by place of origin. We talked about the change in rule and how you don't call it Hong Kong flu or Asian flu anymore the way you did in the pandemics in the 60s. And there was a reason for it. And unfortunately, we're seeing that reason play out.
Right.
right? Sadly, it didn't take long for those fears to be realized. Racist harassment, online verbal attacks in public, and physical assaults against Asian Americans all surged in the early days of the pandemic and have remained alarmingly high ever since. In fact, anti-Asian hate crimes increased by nearly 150% from 219 to 220. It was predictable. We predicted it. It's bad. And then, of course, the big issue in March with the 6 Atlanta women of Asian descent who were murdered.
Okay, yes.
As the targets of this hatred, Asian Americans have been much more aware of the growing problem. In a June 2020 Pew Research Center poll, 58% of Asian Americans said it was more common for people to express racist or racially insensitive views about people who are Asian than it was before the coronavirus outbreak, compared to just 39% of all adults. And in the AAPI Data's 2020 Asian American Voter Survey, about half said they worried very often or somewhat often about experiencing hate crimes. So that particular group is extremely aware of all of this. Political scientists Alexander Coe, Neil Malhotra, and Cecilia Moe have argued that Asian Americans who experience discrimination are more likely to support Democrats because they associate social exclusion based on their ethnic background with the predominantly white Republican Party. This uptick came at the expense of how respondents thought about the Republican Party. That is, the Asian Americans who are subjected to the microaggression were more likely to say Republicans were closed-minded and associate the party with exclusionary treatment. I can't imagine anything happening in Georgia with Brian Kemp would contribute to that.
No.
Right? That is something that has been made much more explicit during the pandemic. In total, the prejudice Asian Americans have experienced during the pandemic does seem to further solidify their already strong support of the Democratic Party. Doesn't mean social exclusion and experiences with discrimination are the only reason, nor is it possible to predict how the rise in anti-Asian hate will affect partisanship in the long run. But at the very least, Republican rhetoric about the pandemic and the rise in anti-Asian hate over the past year seems to have solidified a long-standing link between Asian American feelings of social exclusion and their support for the Democratic Party. So again, you step back and look at the big picture here. Brian Kemp says they're totally race neutral and colorblind when it comes to anything they do, whether it's voting laws or understanding the origins of the Kung flu.
Yes, right, sure. It sounds so neutral.
What's wrong with that statement? Well, you know, the whole point is that everything they do shows that they are the party of white conservative Republicans and nobody else. And this is all part and parcel of that bigger picture.
Yes. Well,
but people see it and they understand that and they vote accordingly, right?
So seeing it and recognizing, that's new.
It is. Now, does that apply to all ethnic groups? Not necessarily. And again, there may well be issues in particular areas and particular groups because there is no one Latino group, no one Hispanic group. There's actually multi layers of where you're from, whether you were born here, whether you immigrated here, how you feel about things. There's definitely a strain of cultural conservative throughout the Latino Hispanic community, for example. But at the same time, there are economic issues that really do matter. My case is that the economic matters are really what pushed Latinos and Hispanics to vote Republican during the pandemic, which is a bit of a surprise, but that's what happened. And so the idea that strong economics will be trumped somehow by discriminatory cultural conservatism and dumb stuff at that, like the Dr. Seuss stuff, and this whole buy-in to cancel culture, which is basically saying we're trying to cancel everybody who's not white, but you guys are the bad cancel culture people. Right. It doesn't make any sense to me, and I don't. It's like looking and saying, okay, well, crime and the backlash to defund the police is what got people to vote for Republicans. Well, it got people who were going to vote for Republicans to vote for Republicans, but actually the Democrats won the majority of the vote and the election. So when you make your case, let's be clear about what you're actually saying. And that leads me to just a brief commentary on a pretty terrific story from Zeynep Tufekci, who's just a fantastic analyst, relatively new to the scene.
Stop being so good at things. You're difficult for the rest of us.
Well, she has a three-parter, and this is part one of the misinformation trifecta. But a lot of focus on misinformation over there, focusing on the outright COVID denialism, for example. Yes. Some of it, the polarization around masks, is complicated by events early in the pandemic, that is to say, not being clear about what masks do and don't do. Some of it, like claims around vaccines changing your DNA, are outright false. But then there's a misinformation over here, which is also quite persistent and also wildly wrong. What's the trifecta? Polarization, which is eating our brains. That's this one, part one of the three-parter. Okay. Bad science, causing terrible policies. One example is not recognizing right away, and still not recognizing officially enough, that coronavirus is an airborne illness.
Oh, yes. All right.
Why does that matter? Because deep cleaning schools is a waste of money. Closing libraries and making sure the books are disinfected for 3 days before you touch them. It's not how you get it. You get it from breathing on people, right? That's where the bad science comes in. And Puritanism and moralizing, masquerading as public health, yelling at Floridians for being out on the beach when, in fact, the problem is the restaurants after when the sun goes down.
Still, have you seen some of these Floridians?
I have.
So you can understand.
Yes. So
it's wrong, but you can understand.
For this post, she says, I want to focus on the first and do the other two next. But an example of how polarization has eaten a lot of our brains. Lots of people are angry, very angry with Florida, and willing to quickly believe the worst. In reality, it's middling. Compared to the rest of the country, Florida's record is not terrible, but it's not stellar. How much of this is middling guidelines? How much of this is the weather advantage? How much of this is just luck? And I would add, how much of this is the people not doing what DeSantis says you are able to because they're smarter than that and they won't go to restaurants? It's not yet fully clear. Of course, in Florida, you can eat outside, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, like all the time.
There's a bunch of theories going around, and this New Yorker article by Sid Mukherjee seems to be one of the better attempts to outline some of the puzzles. He concludes that the culprits for the obvious unknowns may be many, perhaps. But we used to think that for so many other diseases until we found the actual culprit, and it'll be an important study for the future. But the polarized climate means that Andrew Cuomo, who's implicated in a large number of terrible policies, can sell a book about his pandemic leadership for $4 million, while people are readily willing to believe that Florida must be lying and covering up its terrible numbers. Remember the data scientist in Florida who claimed that?
I do.
Noted the motivated reasoning in this Orlando Weekly article. DeSantis is terrible, therefore his policies must be terrible, and therefore there must be a high number of deaths. And if that's not the case, then they must be hiding it.
Okay. I mean,
but that's not how it works.
Oh.
Right? There are excess deaths in Florida. 14,000 COVID deaths, 5,000 unaccounted. And you can't say, okay, so that means that there's 19,000 total, because the 5,000 unaccounted are unaccounted.
Oh, right.
So, they do have a middling issue. The bigger issue in Florida, I think, is how much they test. If you don't test, you don't know. And that's a problem in a lot of southern states and a lot of Republican states. It's a problem in Democratic states as well. Again, the big issue with the pandemic on the one hand may be that what the public does, regardless of their political leadership, matters more than anything else. And on the other, as we move to a new phase, the variants, their more infectiousness, their greater virulence, their greater infectiousness, may in fact be driving what's going on now. And that's why the numbers are rising, despite the good things that everybody has done and despite the vaccinations really picking up. So, we don't know a lot. We do know a lot. And to say that we know it all or we don't know anything is wrong. And if you're going to pick it on people like DeSantis, don't do it just because he's a jerk, or Abbott in Texas. Do it based on what's actually going on in those states. You can't, from outside the state, say, well, Florida's a cesspool, and it is a cesspool. It's literally a cesspool, and some of their toxic water is leaking all over the place. There's a lot of issues. By the way, I would argue that's part of infrastructure as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Pipes and don't just carry water; they also carry toxic waste. And when those those pipes break and you have lead issues in the water, that's a problem. But when you have linings for toxic pools and lakes and they leak, that's a problem too.
Yes.
So infrastructure, I think, is still going to wind up trumping Dr. Seuss in the end. And so look at those policies. Look at Abbott in terms of how there's no regulation for chemical plants, which have a habit of blowing up in populated areas in Texas. And if you don't have enough regulation for toxic lakes, which have a habit of leaking in Florida, then, that's a good reason to get on their cases about what kind of governors they are. The pandemic, again, is going to be tricky because there's so much going on that is and isn't out of their control. And the bottom line is when you look at all the states, we're really not that different from each other.
Well, there's still plenty you can pick on him about if you like. There's news stories circulating about his distribution of vaccines and his dependence on private contractors to deliver a large number of those vaccines. And
again, places like Publix are perhaps a good way to do it, but on the other hand, they only tend to be in wealthier areas. It's like, okay, we're going to have a vaccine program that's going to cover everybody. We'll do it at Whole Foods.
Oh, I was thinking Tiffany, but, we can go there too.
Yeah, we're not even going to do Trader Joe's. We're going to do Whole Foods and nothing else. Okay. And if you don't have a Whole Foods in your area, which tends to be relatively expensive, then too bad for you.
Right. But you can order it on Amazon and pick it up curbside. You just have to be able to get to one and take the day off to get there. But you have to go to Florida to get it. Right. Yeah, well, I do think, there's still plenty of room for criticism of the way he tinkers around the margins with things. And it may be that he's keeping his numbers middling as opposed to just above middling by, pulling a few weird tricks here and there, like how they count where you die if you happen to drop dead in Florida from the virus, but you flew down there.
It wouldn't even be worth mentioning if it weren't for the many stories saying, "Oh, look what a great job Ron DeSantis did with the pandemic. He's going to be the next president." Except when they went to the straw polls at CPAC and everywhere else, he actually didn't do that well.
Yeah, well, still stuck on Trump because blah 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 reasons. I don't know what they are, but they
right. So 60 Minutes just did a whole thing on DeSantis, and whether or not that matters, I don't know. Again, getting the vaccine to people, whatever method you use. If you want to do it through advertisements by Krispy Kremes, fine. I don't really care how you do it, so long as you get it into people's arms. Yeah. What you don't want to do is make it so that other people can't get it, that only your supporters can get it, for example. But getting them in arms as a general rule is a good thing. Again, it goes back to intent. And so everything that looks on paper as semi-reasonable, as Republicans would argue about, why not use Publix? They have a great chain, and we can't do it by ourselves. We don't have the public health infrastructure to do it. Yada yada.
Well, that's a problem.
Fine. Okay, but when you get to intent, that's where it matters, and that's where things fall apart. Mm-hmm. So leaving intent out of what you're doing, is, and the lawyers and the Republicans say, well, that's bad because you never know what's in somebody's heart. Well, how about if they go on camera and they frickin' tell you?
Yes, or leave their notes behind for their kids. Right. True. When you get that, you have to at least then say, well, that's clearly wrong, right? No, That's weird that you find an exception for that, too.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Well taken, then.
So let me finish.
Yes.
With this interesting piece by Mr. Carl Bergstrom.
Yes.
Who is a pretty excellent biology data scientist here.
All right.
He says, in the op-ed pages of newspapers and on cable news, I'm seeing frequent confusion over what it means to reach herd immunity and whether we can relax COVID precautions once we do so. It'll take a few posts, but let me try to explain.
All right.
The key thing to note here is that herd immunity.
I have heard about immunity.
Is the point at enough people are immune so that you don't get a new pandemic.
Okay. I mean, I like the definition.
So you don't get a new epidemic starting from scratch. It's not the point where an ongoing epidemic disappears.
Oh, okay. I see.
When you reach herd immunity, a pandemic is far from over.
But you won't have another one.
But you're basically at peak and it's not growing anymore.
Okay. Right.
But if it's not growing and it's not shrinking, you could still be in a bad place, depending upon where you're at. So if your peak happens to be higher than it was last year, but it's not getting bigger, it's not growing, that can still be bad because it still means a lot of people dying.
Yes.
Okay, an ongoing epidemic is at its peak when the herd immunity threshold is reached. The problem is that while a new epidemic can no longer start from scratch once you reach herd immunity, when we reach this point for COVID, we'll still have the old epidemic underway, and epidemics have something akin to momentum. All of the people who are currently infected will continue to transmit disease after you reach herd immunity. They'll just infect fewer than one additional person on average, so that number, that R naught of 1 goes below 1, and that means that the pandemic won't just continue to multiply and grow. The people they infect, they'll infect others downstream and so on. In other words, people still get sick, people die.
Yeah.
So saying, oh, we've reached herd immunity, it's over, is wrong. It's completely wrong because there are still a lot of sick people and there's still people getting infected. And so that's why, even though people are getting vaccinated, and it's great that more and more people are getting vaccinated, just because more people are getting vaccinated, while good news, isn't reason to take your mask off and then go have Sturgis.
Yes, right. Well, I think the CDC news over the weekend might help illustrate that too. Like, okay, we generally speaking don't have gigantic outbreaks, but we do panic every once in a while when people come down with salmonella outbreaks in the various states. So we give out a huge notice, stop licking the birds and the bird feeder. Don't do it.
Salmonella in wild birds, so wash your hands after you fill the feeder,
which
is certainly a practice I have recently adopted based on that information.
Okay.
It's not bird flu. It's salmonella.
It's just regular salmonella, and you can get
That'll make you sick.
You always knew it was there, right? They kept telling you, be careful, wash your hands, clean up after cooking with chicken, and et cetera. Well,
right, exactly.
They're a little bit related.
It's not just chicken. It's wild birds, too.
Yeah. So don't eat them. And don't handle them.
Don't eat wild birds raw.
But we have these outbreaks every once in a while, and they're concerning. And we say we need to change behavior in order to do this. And how many people died from salmonella from filling up their wild bird feeders without washing their hands? Not a whole lot. Certainly not compared to coronavirus. But these things do crop up, and you need to take care of them.
And then finally, again, we're getting to the end of the hour. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Matt Gaetz is even worse than you thought.
Oh, well, that's true. Thank you. What makes you say so today?
Well, the stories since I was on last about him showing
we gave a lot of time to that
conquests to his fellow young male representatives.
Yes.
As part of a game to see how many points you could score. And that alone not having him thrown out of Congress.
Yeah. Nobody caned him. I'm wondering when an old man
that
Republican
alone
beat
is
him over the
horrible.
Head. It is.
Everything else that he's being accused of is even worse, but that alone is horrible.
It's pretty crazy, and I can't understand. Yeah, I mean, I guess he's been conditioned to it, but I'm amazed at the, view, the outlook on life that makes you say, I should probably run for Congress. What they need is me and my nude pictures all the time. We haven't had any problems before with politicians doing things like this. It's going to be great, and saying, yeah, I belong there.
Right.
But that's
as a very, very talented woman I know who posts on Twitter said, I've worked with men all my life. The vast majority seem to make it through life without sexually harassing women at the workplace or anywhere else. It can't be that hard.
Yeah, pretty simple. It's actually easier not to do that.
Right, exactly. So that's the story.
Okay.
That's the many stories, and we'll be following all of this. The trial resumes today.
Yes.
Sports is very much a part of our culture, so you can't cancel them. Sorry, Republicans. And what happens in Georgia and what happens in Milwaukee, is going to resonate. And, we'll follow it. And we'll be back on Wednesday to talk about it more.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, we still have a pandemic, so get your shots and still be careful.
Right. And also now don't lick birds. So.
Yeah. And again, reaching herd immunity isn't necessarily a good thing if the peak of where you're at is really high, and that's why let's not get vaccinated. Let's just go out and get sick, and then we'll reach herd immunity was always really, really a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I guess it was an easy mistake to make for people who really had no
But you couldn't correct it.
Things.
You would point this out to people, and no, you're wrong. Herd immunity, the earlier the possible, it's better.
It says immunity right in the name.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of. Yeah, no, I understand that. As I'm watching these numbers day to day and just tweeting out what I see in Worldometers, I've learned to recognize the rate, the baseline rate of growth that the disease will have, even when it's not spreading like wildfire. When you have things relatively under control, there's a certain pace at which the disease spreads and grows, and that's, I guess, related to what you're talking about. We're not done. We're not immune as a society or as a planet. It's just most
to the point where
are.
It's no longer an issue.
Right. It's a small number of a lot of people is still a lot of people. 5% of several billion is
look,
millions.
3% of all credit card fraud is still a lot of fraud.
Right, true. Hey, it's the zero you're looking for here. Let's see if we can get to that. Okay, very good.
Alrighty, take care,
taken.
and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Excellent. That's the plan. All right, we'll talk to you then. We are just about bumping up to our top of the hour break. Not quite there yet, but as I was saying, the observation I was making with the Worldometers numbers, it seems like as we were ramping up to this peak, and now that we're perhaps passing this peak, there's just a lot of places where the spread is slowing down, and the growth in the rate of the raw numbers of people, or the people per million who are contracting the disease or being reported to have contracted the disease because they're getting the testing, it grows at a certain rate, and it balloons, but then it comes back to it, but it still grows at something like 0.1% out of a population of people per million all the time. So, pretty bad. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let me clarify what I was saying on my way out at the top of the hour break. Looking at numbers, one of the more interesting numbers I've found that Worldometers presents, without any further parsing of the numbers, the total caseload per 1 million in population. So, for instance, if you wanted to say, where have they detected the most disease? That's all that you can really parse out of it. It's not necessarily the place that's the most infected, because we certainly have a lot of places in this country and around the world where the actual rate at which people may have contracted the disease is not the same thing as the rate at which we have found positive tests in people. There's a lot of undetected COVID in circulation in a lot of places. But it's one of the things I watch anyway, and you would begin to expect results like this, that in some of these micro states, like at the very top of the list, the number one spot for a long time has been occupied on the list of the hot places where the total cases per 1 million population is highest, is Andorra, the European microstate. Some of the countries of somewhat larger size on the list, but not by much. The actual 1 through 10 essentially is a bunch of very small, either microstates or relatively small European countries, and then the anomaly of the United States thrown in the middle there. There's our population, of course, is something in the neighborhood of 330 million people. The next largest country in the top 10 list, Czechia, with just over 10.7 million in population. There's just nothing close to the United States. I mean, it's hard to get close to the population of the United States. There are very few countries that, have got populations of that size. But it's an embarrassment that everybody else, you would expect when the metric you're looking at is total cases per million. Well, when there aren't even a million people in the country you're talking about, well, you're going to see the numbers kind of skew towards these microstates, I guess. But still, it is, normalized by population to some extent. It shouldn't be so difficult. But I think what drives those numbers up is some of these smaller states are able to test every single person in the country and to do it multiple times. And to the extent that Trump has ever uttered anything that was accidentally close to true, the idea of tests revealing cases, I mean, yeah, it's true that they do reveal cases, but of course going untested doesn't mean you have less disease, it just means you have less understanding of the disease. Anyway, so Andorra, for instance, at the top of the list, has 158,107 total cases per million in population. Now, how many people actually live in Andorra? Far fewer than a million, far fewer than 100,000. There are 77,359 is the current total estimated population of Andorra, and the figure we're using to calculate this. How many total cases have they actually had in Andorra? Now, when you point to what about the most infected place, if you use that incorrect label, I guess, inaccurate label, to say the most infected jurisdiction, sovereign jurisdiction on Earth, Andorra. Well, 12,231 cases. That's not a lot for a place like the United States. There's no state in our entire country, no matter what the populations are, that doesn't have 12,000 cases in it easily. As a matter of fact, I think Vermont, which is bringing up the rear in terms of total number of cases reported by state, finally did top 20,000, though. So in other words, I guess one way of looking at it, there's no state in the country that doesn't have at least 20,000 cases. I think we've got like 8 states that have reported over 1 million. So there's a large variance out there, a wide range. But 12,231 total cases in Andorra, where there's only 77,000 people, does translate to 158,107 total cases per million. Easy way to figure out what that means in a way that might, make more sense to you. If you take that comma, let's say, and turn it into a decimal point and then bump it one place to the left, it tells you, because you're dividing by 1 million in population, which of course they don't have. But if they had 1 million people in Andorra instead of 77,000, you would expect then to see 158,000 cases out of the 1 million people there versus the 12,000 that they now have. But if you bump that comma, turn it into a decimal point and bump it one place to the left, you get 15.8. That's, in other words, what percentage of Andorra's population has tested positive? That's what the 158,000 cases per million tells you. 15.8% of the population has tested positive. Next up, by the way, just in case you're wondering, can you guess? Probably not, unless you've seen the lists. Montenegro, 628,000 in population, about 14.7% of the population infected there. The United States comes in at number 8. And as I said, the company we're keeping is mostly tiny countries. Andorra, Montenegro, Czechia, the next biggest country, 10.7 million. San Marino, Gibraltar, not even really a country per se. Slovenia with 2 million. Luxembourg, famously tiny. United States, Israel, 9 million. And then Aruba, which has kind of brought up the rear and snuck up into the list in the last, 3 weeks or so. But yeah, there's nothing approaching the size of the United States for a long ways here. In case you're wondering, Bahrain, Estonia, Lithuania, Panama, Portugal, Sweden, still up there, St. Barth. I mean, you're talking about some tiny places. 9 under 10,000 people there. Belgium, larger, but still kind of small. Netherlands, larger, but still one of the smaller countries in Europe. France comes in at number 20, the biggest country having a big problem that you find anywhere near the top of the list. But again, still smaller jurisdictions. Hungary, Serbia, Georgia, Liechtenstein, right? Then Spain, Lebanon. At least we're getting into larger, more recognizable places. There's a lot of places on this list that people say, what? I didn't even know that was a country. In some cases it's not. But anyway, what I'm finding from these numbers, watching them day by day, is that there's a more or less normal rate of growth and then an excessive rate of growth that happens when you have a really serious outbreak. And then there's a minimal rate of growth that is indicative usually of them, of a jurisdiction getting a hold of its outbreak by distributing vaccines, or in the earlier days of the epidemic, it seemed that all the low-hanging fruit of the initial infection, the people who had not yet come to understand that they could mitigate the rate of infection by wearing masks, by staying further apart, by staying home entirely, washing your hands, etc., and taking all the mitigation practices seriously. Everybody else who wouldn't do that was basically snapped up pretty quickly. But at any rate, what I mean to say is that from the earlier days of the pandemic through the present, it seemed like a place that was taking reasonable precautions but still seeing spread would see its rate of infection rise by what amounts to not 1/10, but 1/100% each day fairly regularly. And that when you rose above that rate, such that you were moving from, for instance, Andorra's number of 158,107 is in fact 15.8107%. Because of the way the math works there. So you would see today, for instance, right now, 158,107. If you're progressing at the rate you might expect the disease to progress at, because either you haven't reached herd immunity or whatever other reason, you're not taking proper precautions, but not going crazy, you would expect to see things move from 158,100 today to something in the neighborhood of 158,200 tomorrow, and 158,300 the next day. Give or take a couple 10s and 20s here and there. And that when an outbreak started to worsen, you would see it jumping by leaps and bounds, sometimes just a little more than that. If it was jumping 200 points a day, something was catching fire there. But at the height of the pandemic, when things were really going crazy, a mildly out of control outbreak might be moving by 1/10 of a percentage point per day, moving from 158,107 if the next day you were at 159,107. That's still just 1/10 of a percentage point of your population, but that's just one day's growth. But there were many jurisdictions where it was moving like that, or you might even see 2/10 of a percentage change when things were really on fire, and some of these jurisdictions rocketing up the ranks. Now things have settled down. Now some places raced up so far and saw so much of their population infected, or at least tested, and then found to be carrying the virus, that they moved up to the top of these charts and just kind of stayed there, even though Andorra's rate of growth has come back down to the neighborhood where many days it's seeing only that 1/100th of a percent in growth. There are other places that have really been racing up the ranks. And similarly with deaths, although the numbers are, of course, lower and the growth rate correspondingly lower, but you get to see that there's a certain level at which you can expect deaths to grow and cases to grow, even in places that could be said to have a handle on the spread of the disease. In other words, even when you are reaching either, perhaps herd immunity because you've passed out plenty of vaccine, or you are reaching the point where your mitigation strategy has been working for some time so that you are controlling the growth, there's still growth. And in many places, of course, in the United States, for instance, where we had, what did we say, 330 million, it's actually about 333 million people. I can give you the actual number because it's in front of me. The current estimated population of the United States, 332,473,823. And take that number. Why not? It's right in front of me. 332,473,823. And say, if things are under control nationwide, you still end up seeing a rise of about 1/100th%. Right? So let's see. What do you multiply by that? Let's see. Times 0.0. Let's see. 0.1 would be a tenth. 0/100th. Okay. So 0.001. You still, if you're growing by that rate, you're still seeing 332,000 cases added per day. Now, we haven't seen that in a while, but there was a time when you did see that. 1/100th% of the entire population of the United States. We were never doing it at that rate, of course, but by broken down by state, individual states were moving at rates like that. Not all the 50 states, so that's why we didn't see the entirety of the United States, except at its peak, add that many cases. But you will recall that it hasn't been that long since we were, in fact, reporting 400,000 cases in a day. That would be, let's see, when we can look at the charts and go back to the peak. Daily new cases. I guess about at its peak, we were seeing in the neighborhood of 300,000 reported daily. Back in, we peaked at, what do you know, just before we got rid of Donald Trump. We were peaking at that point. And now things way down. But I will point out, if you look at it graphically, where we are now, significant drop from that Trump peak. However, that peak also corresponds to about the rate that we were reporting new cases at what we thought was our second wave back in August. That was like, at that point, we see these nodes on this chart being, about, April of 2020, we had a peak and then a little valley and then another peak that was even higher. That would be the August peak and then a little valley and then just giant Donald Trump doesn't even care anymore peak that shot us through the roof nationally. Anyway, you get to see these things, and I guess this is a long way around to it, but what Greg is saying here is that even at the point where we reach herd immunity, and we're not quite there yet, but you see, what the effect of approaching herd immunity thanks to the vaccine is going to look like, you are still going to see a fairly significant number of people continue to catch the virus. And thankfully, if they're vaccinated, it means that they probably won't be hospitalized or then die from the disease. But if not, well, then they will be. And then, of course, even after everybody, theoretically, if everyone were to get the shot, we still have the problem of it being only 95% effective, but 100% effective at preventing people from having serious illness, but they'll still miss some work. 5% of the population, no small number of people, if they get it all at once, if they all got it at once, of course, it would be far worse than we've ever had it with this pandemic throughout. So, it's just the law of large numbers thing, I guess. And you got to be aware of the fact that the herd immunity doesn't mean everyone in the herd is immune. That's a totally different story, and we probably should have come up with a better term for it than that. And that probably stands in the way of our doing what needs doing in order to eradicate the disease. There's still that term. You can shoot for eradication. Forget the herd immunity. Let's get rid of the damn thing. All right. Let's jump back into Pocket and pull out the stories that we have put aside for discussion. I said that the big story of the weekend was the New York Times piece about Trump stealing money from all of his supporters, which I guess, like Greg said, is properly not, it just can't be viewed as a surprise of any kind. But it was an interesting look at the techniques that were in use. And there's a lot of discussion points. Let's run through it. It's a long story. And maybe you read some of it, but I wanted to, I guess, stop on a few points. I think that it'll relate to a lot of the other stories we're going to be discussing in the near future. So how Trump steered supporters into unwitting donations. The subheader here explains it all. Online donors were guided into weekly recurring contributions. Demands for refunds spiked. Complaints to banks and credit card companies soared. That's what Greg was talking about. But the money helped keep Donald Trump's struggling campaign afloat. First discussion point, again, back to what we said at the beginning of the show. What happened to multi-billionaire guy whose campaign was never going to struggle to stay afloat because he was a multi-billionaire, for Christ's sake? Well, as you know, as you learned over the years, if you didn't know at the very beginning, Trump is a grifter. There was no chance he was going to use his own money long-term for any of this stuff, and probably not short-term either. And to the extent that he did short-term, he would be, quote-unquote, paying himself back from these donor-raised funds instead. So what happened? Shane Goldmacher lays it all out for us. One illustrative story begins the piece. Stacy Blatt was in hospice care last September, just to make it even worse, listening to Rush Limbaugh's dire warnings of how badly Donald J. Trump's campaign needed money when he went online and chipped in everything he could, $500. Now, Stacy Blatt was in hospice care last September, has since died. Listening to Rush Limbaugh, since died. Donald Trump somehow remains alive through all this. But just, again, the scenario. Donald Trump's campaign, look how badly it needs money. Why? He's a multi-billionaire. I thought the whole point was he would never need money. I don't need to steal money from you. I'm going to be honest because I never need money. And now what? Holy mackerel, he needs money. And he's dishonest? What? I never... Well, anyway. Plus, of course, the story that much worse because the guy is dying and he steals all his money. So he goes to give $500. It was a big sum for a 63-year-old battling cancer and living in Kansas City on less than $1,000 per month. All right, $1,000 for the entire month. 500 of it just went to Donald Trump. But that single contribution, federal records show it was his first ever, quickly multiplied. Another $500 was withdrawn the next day, which we'll get to explaining how that is possible. But the next day, they took another $500. Less than $1,000 a month this guy has to live on. He gave 500 of it to Donald Trump. Donald Trump then punched him in the face and took the other 500 the next day. Then $500 the next week. And every week through mid-October without his knowledge until Mr. Blatt's bank account had been depleted and frozen. When his utility and rent payments bounced, he called his brother, Russell, for help. What the Blatts soon discovered was $3,000 in withdrawals by the Trump campaign in less than 30 days. Remember, he's only got $1,000 for 30 days, but they took $3,000. They called their bank and said they thought they were the victims of fraud. They were, of course, but they thought they were the victims of fraud, that somebody else was defrauding them. Someone else got a hold of my credit card number and they've been stealing it. No, it was Donald Trump and you gave it to him. But what the Blatts believed was duplicity was actually an intentional scheme to boost revenues by the Trump campaign. I love that, boost revenues. Steal money. Boost revenues by the Trump campaign and the for-profit company that processed its online donations, and that company's name is WinRed. It's important not only because the people who run the place are disgraces to the human race and, deserve to possibly be thrown in jail, but instead, as you'll find out later in the article, if we even get around to it, are in fact being celebrated by being listed on the 40 under 40 list at the American Association of Political Consultants. These are like rising stars in the business, as opposed to criminals who ought to be ostracized by polite society. The American Association of Political Consultants says these are our best and brightest. The other thing that's important to note about WinRed is it probably rings a bell or sounds somewhat familiar to you. You may have given money, of course, through Act Blue at some point, right? And like Act Blue, like Daily Kos, like, as we've pointed out a number of times, Wikipedia, which is not a democratic organization, whenever Republicans feel that they've become disadvantaged or been outplayed digitally in some fashion by anybody, they say, we're going to start a Republican version of this thing, whether it's Conservapedia or Red State in order to compete with Daily Kos, or Act Blue is pantsing us. Well, we're going to have, I guess we won't call it Act Red. We'll one-up them. Not just Act Red, we'll win Red. And that's the way they named their thing. And by the way, just taking that thing and running with it, the fact that they are defrauding people so frequently, or making people believe so frequently that the non-fraudulent practices in which they're engaging are in fact fraud, but you're thinking that incorrectly. You won't be able to sue us because you checked this box, even though we checked it for you. You'll see. Anyway, that's the way Reds win. Yeah. So, it reflects badly on the whole Republican brand. But in case you were wondering, win means steal money from you. That's how they win. And who's stealing the money from you? Red people are stealing money. Republicans. That's the answer. So it's all wrapped up in the name. But do keep in mind that, I think there's room to shame the American Association of Political Consultants here in saying that, well, they're big successes. They've stolen more money than anybody. They're on our 40 under 40 list. They're under 40 years of age, and they're up-and-comers, which it should really be, the list should be 40 people who should be doing 40 years to life, I suppose. But I guess at least half the list are doing things honestly, maybe. Anyway, back to the article. Facing a cash crunch, how could Donald Trump be facing a cash crunch? And getting badly outspent by the Democrats, the campaign had begun last September to set up recurring donations by default for online donors, for not just for every month. And there's a similar plan among Democrats. Although they ask you, or very often will send you to a different landing page that begins by saying, would you like to make your donation monthly recurring donation, which is a great idea. I ask people to do it at Patreon, right? But that's the whole idea of the program, is to make, I would like you to make a monthly recurring donation. Now, if I switched that later on to say weekly, well, you would probably want to adjust your number. But people are used to maybe the monthly ones. The weekly was brand new. And again, you don't assign that by default. But you do if you're Donald Trump and you're a thief. Contributors had to wade through a fine print disclaimer and manually uncheck a box to opt out, which even as that's described doesn't sound all that terrible. If you are somewhat online savvy, you see these things sometimes checked all the time, and it would be nicer in some cases if they began unchecked and you had to opt in. But they're usually fairly obvious, and they say what they say, and you say, hey, I don't want to be a part of this. But later on, they really did some amazing things in their experimenting with the language, and they did everything they could to obfuscate what was happening in this checkbox, even though, for the purposes of anticipating the litigation, they'll come in and they'll say, well, we put it in a separate box, and we highlighted the box with highlighter yellow color, and it stands out from the rest of the page, and there's bold text in there and there's underlined text in there. But what they eventually began to do is put so much irrelevant text in these boxes that you had to root through this for 5 minutes to find the relevant text that said, we're going to charge you every week, but it's in a box, is what they're going to say at trial. We'll see how well it works. We'll come right back to this after this break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's jump right back into the long New York Times article and revealing New York Times article. As the election neared, the Trump team that made that disclaimer increasingly opaque. I kind of described that, but you got to see it visually, I think, to really fully understand it. An investigation by the New York Times showed it introduced a second pre-checked box. This is the mechanism by which they stole that second $500 the next day. A second pre-checked box known internally as a money bomb that doubled a person's contribution. Eventually, its solicitations featured lines of text in bold and capital letters that overwhelmed the opt-out language. But you hear what they're saying here. This kind of overwhelmed the surprise of the money bomb. First of all, money bomb, a term that I did see, I think, in usage before, has taken a turn like fake news. Like initially, people who used the fake news terminology were talking about the websites like the ones maintained by Macedonian teenagers. By the way, North Macedonia is suffering horribly in the COVID-19 outbreak, and if you're looking for any sort of karmic come around, although it's not clear that it's the hacker teenagers who are suffering from it, so unfair perhaps to pronounce judgment on Macedonia as a whole. And I guess some confusion in my own mind now that I think about it, about, are we talking about the same place? Why North Macedonia? Is that a different place? Is that, I assume so, right? Anyway, my geopolitical skills failing me on that one. I don't have very many of them. But anyway, the money bomb terminology, I guess, like fake news, it first started out describing places that literally just were in the business of starting websites that filled themselves with fake, usually pro-Trump news as clickbait, but later was appropriated and redirected by the Trump campaign to mean real news that is unfavorable to Donald Trump could be dismissed as fake news. Same with the money bomb in a way. As I recall, the beginnings of the use of the term of the money bomb was, well, we're trying to drum up a large surge in donations, sometimes like right before the end of the quarterly reporting period or something like that, or something to show that a particular candidate is exhibiting a certain amount of unexpected, sudden strength in the campaign by driving up donations. But here it's been appropriated, and we will create a money bomb not made up of people who are knowingly joining our effort to try and make some sort of mass wave of donations look very impressive, but by stealing extra donations and they're not donations at that point, but stealing extra money from people who have agreed to donate once, we will secretly make them donate twice and call that a money bomb. And then they would use that for that same reason as the original money bomb and go to the press and say, look how much money we raised just yesterday. Well, we're breaking all records. And curiously, we've nearly doubled our previous daily record. Well, that's about what you would expect if you are slipping through pre-checked opt-in boxes that actually authorize you to steal a second donation the next day. Then, yeah, you've just about doubled your take. No surprise there. If you say, well, our practice is to, like you could do it two ways. One, this way, I think they might even be able to get away with to a certain extent in court. Now, another way that you would not get away with is if you said every time someone donates money, we're going to tell the credit card company that they donated twice as much and to please credit our accounts for twice as much. We know they didn't donate it, and we know we'll eventually have to give it back, but tomorrow's newspaper will say we doubled our take. And that's what we're really interested in. Forget that we stole half of that money and have to give it back to them. The news headline that we were looking for, Trump campaign doubles their record in a single day, makes people nervous, makes the other side change their strategies perhaps, or do things differently or reprioritize. And the fact that it was all a lie, well, we're aware of that, but they're not, and they changed their strategy based on that lie, and good. We were hoping they would change their strategy, and we succeeded. Yes, we'll be in legal trouble, but not now, later. Anyway, I object to, that sort of perversion of this term. But okay, they called it a money bomb, and yeah, it doubled people's contributions. Eventually, its solicitations featured all this extra text that made it difficult to even find out that there was opt-out options available to you. The tactic ensnared scores of unsuspecting Trump loyalists, retirees, military veterans, nurses, and even experienced political operatives, in case you thought they would see right through it. Soon, banks and credit card companies were inundated with fraud complaints from the president's own supporters about donations they had not intended to make, sometimes for thousands of dollars. Bandits, said Victor Amelino, who no doubt would vote for Trump again anyway. A 78-year-old Californian who made a $990 online donation to Mr. Trump in early September via WinRed. And guess what? It recurred 7 more times, adding up to almost $8,000. I'm retired. I can't afford to pay all that damn money, says Victor Amelino. The sheer magnitude of the money involved is staggering for politics. In the final 2.5 months of 2020, the Trump campaign, the Republican National Committee, and their shared accounts issued more than 530,000 refunds worth $64.3 million to online donors. And you might say, if they made the refunds, then what's the problem? We'll get to that. All campaigns make refunds for various reasons, including to people who give more than the legal limit. Keep an eye on that one. But the sum the Trump operation refunded dwarfed that of Joe Biden's campaign and his equivalent Democratic committees, which made 37,000 online refunds, again, compared to 530,000, right? So more than 10 times the number. And the Biden refunds totaled $5.6 million in this time frame versus $64.3 million on the Trump side. The recurring donations swelled Mr. Trump's treasury in September and October, just as his finances were deteriorating. And again, a billionaire's finances shouldn't deteriorate. He was able then to use tens of millions of dollars that he raised after the election, under the guise of fighting his unfounded fraud claims, to help cover the refunds that he owed. Now that is something that deserves more time. And I think I did see somebody, and I'm sure I can find it if I scroll back in my own tweets. I retweeted somebody's comment, and I want to say off the top of my head who it is, but why not refrain until I find it for sure. But somebody's saying one of the more important aspects of this article that really isn't a highlighted takeaway is Trump's scheme to steal all this money. It was so costly, or it would eventually be so costly because they would know they would have to refund so much of this money. He was practically forced into, or, probably knew ahead of time and was okay with. Yeah, here it is. Dylan Scott. I was going to say that's the name, and then I was like, is Dylan Scott like a real person, or am I making this name up in my head? Because I don't normally follow him, but I've seen the name enough. Anyway, Dylan Scott saying that this incredible story that we're reading right now puts Trump's whole post-election fight in a different light. We've talked about the super PAC that he started and the leadership PAC that he started, both of which were to rake in money to fight against the election results and supposedly to pay for like the Kraken lawsuits and supposedly to pay to fight in the Georgia runoff elections. And then he just didn't use any of the money for any of those things. And we thought, well, is he keeping the money or pocketing it or what? And in the leadership PAC, he can use it for his own lifestyle. The super PAC, it's more difficult, let's say, but he can, of course, book events at his own properties and therefore convert super PAC money into personal money. But this is even more devious. As we've noted for a long time, there's very little possibility that even Donald Trump and his close supporters could really have believed that the election was stolen. It was just, we thought, well, it's a great opportunity for them to raise money and then steal that money. And Donald Trump loves doing that. So maybe that's enough to explain it. But Dylan Scott says there's more. What he's done here is used the dispute of the election not only to raise money, but that they needed to fan these flames and continue to insist that the election had been stolen so that they could raise money that way, so that they could pay off the refunds that they were expecting to pay from people who would claim they were defrauded from this program during the regular election. As Dylan Scott puts it, he'd more or less defrauded his own supporters out of tens of millions of dollars and needed to continue this post-election fight just to be able to cover the costs of the refunds. We may have seen an insurrection at the Capitol solely because he needed to continue to lie about the fact that that he believed the election was stolen just to get this money to pay off refunds. And people then stormed the Capitol and murdered police officers over this. But I needed it to cover my expenses. I was a billionaire, I said, but I needed it to cover my... Imagine, this is a very interesting twist on the whole story. It's really something, and it doesn't get the attention it deserves in the story because there's so many terrible, terrible things about this story. But they should revisit it, and I imagine they plan to do something like that too. All right, let me continue on here. In effect, the money that Mr. Trump eventually had to refund amounted to an interest-free loan from unwitting supporters at the most important juncture of the 2020 race. Why lend your own money to the race when you can get it interest-free from a bunch of other suckers? And here also is where some of that plays into. Some of it might have been intentional in earlier stages in the campaign. As they mentioned, one of the reasons sometimes campaigns have to make refunds to people is when they give money in excess of the legal limit. Gee whiz, can you imagine Donald Trump engineering such a thing? There's a limit. You can only give $2,800 to my campaign, fellow fake billionaire. But I want lots of money, and I need lots of money. But more importantly, I need lots of money immediately to cover some costs. Don't worry about it. You'll get it back later on. But in the meantime, I need to have my bank balance say X in order to, have the credit worthiness to buy this TV time. So instead of obeying the legal limit and giving me $2,800, will you give me $50,000? You don't have to worry about it because you're going to get most of it back. I'm going to have to give you back 50,000, whatever 50,000 minus 2,800 is, you'll get back. So you're not going to be out $50,000. You're going to be out just under $3,000. But for a short period of time, if you could inject that cash in and I'll inject it right back into your account later, could you do that? And, as far as the creditors or potential creditors are concerned, I see $50,000 in that guy's account, not $3,000. I'll approve that loan, that transaction, that whatever, even though that money is about to disappear. Yeah, you could probably do that. Marketers have long used ruses like pre-checked boxes to steer American consumers into unwanted purchases, like magazine subscriptions. It's interesting that he didn't choose newspaper, but okay. Consumer advocates, though, say deploying the practice on voters in the heat of a presidential campaign and at such volume and with withdrawals every week, that had much more serious ramifications. It's unfair, it's unethical, and it's inappropriate, says Ira Reingold, executive director of the National Association of Consumer Advocates. Harry Brignall, a user experience designer in London, who coined the term dark patterns for manipulative digital marketing practices, said the Trump team's techniques were a classic of the deceptive design genre. It should be in textbooks of what you shouldn't do, he said. Now, meanwhile, the practice has landed the consultants who ran it on the up-and-comers list by the American Association of Political Consultants. But it's what you shouldn't do. Except, of course, if you listen to the American Association of Political Consultants. Political strategists, digital operatives, and campaign finance experts said they could not recall ever seeing refunds at such a scale. Trump, the RNC, and their shared accounts refunded far more money to online donors in the last election cycle than every federal Democratic candidate and committee in the country combined, in case you were wondering about the scale. Overall, the Trump operation refunded 10.7% of the money it raised on WinRed in 2020. The Biden operation's refund rate on ActBlue, which they designate as, and in certain sense it's true, but you'll see why I object now, the parallel Democratic online donation processing platform, ActBlue, 2.2% in refunds, federal records show. Now, I object, of course, to the parallel Democratic online donation processing because there's very little that's similar about WinRed and ActBlue except for the fact they both process money for donations. But WinRed, of course, for profit and all about stealing money, and ActBlue, not for profit and really not nearly as, not even in the same universe of refunds, if you want to measure the, possibility that they somehow are more implicated in fraud if they have a refund rate at all. But no, it's got, ActBlue has about the same rate of refunds as a normal campaign. People changed their minds. People gave too much. Whatever their reasons, they ask for refunds. It's just a small percentage. Over 10% of the money that WinRed took in and processed for the Trump campaign ended up having to be in refunds. And there's more to it than just for profit and not for profit. You'll see later. And there's a graphic illustration that shows the size of the problem for the Trump campaign versus the Biden campaign here as well. Skipping over that because it's visual. Several bank representatives who fielded fraud claims directly from consumers estimated that WinRed cases at their peak represented as much as 1 to 3% of their workload. That gets back to what Greg had mentioned earlier in the show, that somebody was saying, well, about 3%, maybe up to, but 3% of the fraud cases in the country, that is the number of people calling their banks and saying, someone's stealing my money without authorization, I want you to find out who, 3% of that workload turned out to be Donald Trump stealing money through WinRed. That's incredible. An executive for one of the nation's larger credit card issuers confirmed that WinRed at its height accounted for a similar percentage of its formal disputes. And again, it's not people calling the Trump campaign so much and saying, I didn't mean for it to be like that. You got to give me my money back. They took so much money so quickly that people called their banks and said, someone must have stolen my identity and is draining my bank account. That's what they thought was going on. Anyway, so again, 1 to 3% of their workload was just Trump and WinRed. That figure may seem small, actually, at first glance, but financial experts said it was a shockingly large percentage, considering that political donations represent a tiny fraction of the overall United States economy. These people, of course, at these banks and credit card companies field complaints for the entirety of the economy that operates on credit card transactions. People say, I went to get my car fixed and they didn't fix it. I bought masks and they didn't show up, or whatever it is, and they claim fraud. Political donations are a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of the overall economy. That 3% of the fraud processing, fraud complaints should be about political donations at all would be shocking. The fact that they're about one campaign is indicative of mass purposeful fraud, to be honest. In its investigation, the Times reviewed filings with the Federal Election Commission from the Trump and Biden campaigns and their shared accounts with political parties, as well as the donation processing sites ActBlue and WinRed, compiling a database of refunds issued by day. The Times also interviewed 24 Trump donors who made recurring donations, as well as campaign officials, campaign finance experts, and consumer advocates. Nearly a dozen bank and credit card officials from the nation's leading financial institutions spoke for this article on condition of anonymity to discuss certain internal matters. A clear pattern emerged, and you have seen what the pattern is by now. Donors typically say they intended to give once or twice and only later discovered on their bank statements and credit card bills that they were donating over and over again. Some, like Mr. Blatt, who died of cancer in February, sought an injunction from their banks and credit cards. Others pursued refunds directly from WinRed, which typically granted them in order to avoid more costly formal disputes. But if we don't get to it in this article, in this reading, it's in here. It's just deeper in the article. WinRed, another difference, why it's not parallel with ActBlue. If you get a refund from ActBlue, right, you gave $100 to Joe Schmo for Congress, you want a refund, right, you get $100 back. WinRed says, well, we take X percent, and the percentage is spelled out as a fee. Now, ActBlue takes a percentage as a fee also, but when they issue refunds, they refund the whole thing. They don't keep the fee. WinRed keeps the fee. So it doesn't matter to them if they're refunding hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars. They're keeping the fees. It should, by logic, matter to the campaign, but if the campaign is doing it as a strategy, then they know that, they're aware of it, they're okay with it. It's a bad strategy, it's fraud, you shouldn't do that, but they're Trump, and they do it. WinRed, I don't care how deceptive your practices are. If you have to refund money, that's your problem. We're keeping the fees. That's amazing. Don't call them parallel. I see what they're doing. It's shorthand, but try not to do it. WinRed said that every donor receives at least one follow-up email about pending repeat donations in advance, and that the company makes it exceptionally easy, they said, with 24-hour customer service for people to request their money back. Because what do they care, right? They're not giving their portion of the money back. WinRed wants donors to be happy and puts a premium on customer support, says Garrett, or maybe Jarrett, I don't know, Gerrit, Lansing, WinRed's president. Donors are the lifeblood of GOP campaigns. He noted that Democrats and ActBlue also used recurring programs. True, but it was never weekly. And when you asked for a refund, you got the whole thing. Jason Miller, disgusting, filthy rapist, also spokesman for Mr. Trump, downplayed the rash of fraud complaints and the $122.7 million in total refunds issued by the Trump operation. Almost $125 million just in refunds. He said internal records showed that 0.87% of its WinRed transactions had been subject to formal credit card disputes. The fact that we had a dispute rate of less than 1% of total donations, despite raising more grassroots money than any campaign in history, is remarkable, he said. Again, if you take it to the level of a formal credit card dispute. But if you called either your credit card company or WinRed and your credit card company said, call WinRed and ask for a refund, and you did it, And they said, we will refund your money. And they send you back 95% of your money. Most people are just going to be like, I'm not going to fight about the $5 or $10 that they kept. I'm glad to have the 90 back. And that's that. And I'm not going to hire a lawyer to go after the $5. But do that a million times, that's $5 million in your pocket for WinRed. So no, it doesn't rise to the rate, to the level of formal credit card dispute, because you get your money or most of your money back. So it's a little misleading to rely on that stat. Anyway, as they point out in the article, that still amounts to about 200,000 disputed transactions that Mr. Miller said added up to $19.7 million. Well, we had only 0.87% went to formal credit card disputes. How many actual people said, I'm still pursuing this? 200,000. And at a value of almost $20 million. That's huge. Our campaign, look at the spin on this. Our campaign was built on the hardworking men and women of America, Mr. Miller said after raping more people, I guess. And cherishing their investments was paramount to anything else we did. Asked if Mr. Trump had been aware of his operation's use of recurring payments, the campaign did not respond. Mr. Trump's hyper-aggressive fundraising practices did not stop once he lost the election. We mentioned this already. His campaign continued the weekly withdrawals through the pre-checked boxes all the way through December 14th, as he raised tens of millions of dollars for his new political action committee, Save America. That's the leadership PAC that he can keep the money from. In March, yes. In March, Trump urged his followers to send their money to him and not the traditional party apparatus, making plain that he intends to remain the gravitational center of Republican fundraising online. And I guess that's supposed to mean he's going to remain at the top of the party. But what it really means is I'm going to steal this money. I'm not directing money to the RNC because I can't steal from them anymore. I need to steal directly from you. So then a pretty lengthy discussion of those little yellow boxes that they'll say, it was yellow. How do you miss it? Like I said, it started out with a yellow box. Their early yellow box in March 2020 says, make this a monthly recurring donation, with a little pre-checked box. So that probably didn't fool as many people, but they kept adding more and more language to it. And it's illustrated here until finally they get down to, all right, if you see this yellow box, it's a yellow box. It must be important. I should read what's in the yellow box. What's in there now? It's pre-checked, and it says this. Instead of make this a weekly recurring donation, which is what it says in small, unbolded type at the bottom. But to get to that, it says things that you'll agree with, but are irrelevant to what this box is about. What does this box say before I go on with this? This is the final month until Election Day, and we need every patriot stepping up if we're going to win 4 more years for President Trump. He's revitalizing our economy, restoring law and order, and returning us to American greatness. But he's not done yet. This is your chance. Stand with President Trump and maximize your impact now. Make this a weekly donation recurring until 11/3. And that was the disclaimer. Of course, I agree. They put 200 things that I agree with, even though they're nonsense, up here first. I definitely want to stand with Donald Trump. That's what I'm doing here. Of course, I think he's an American patriot. Of course, I want to help him and maximize my contributions, etc. Oh, that means make the same contribution I just made now every week until the election is over, and then for several weeks thereafter. I didn't realize that. Yes, that's right, because they realized, look, there has to be a disclaimer box or else we're in trouble in the courts. And when people sue us, we will lose. Okay, so we'll have a box. Well, but then it has to be prominent and it has to say what we're doing. All right, well, how about this? It doesn't say that we can't talk for 25 minutes about what we're not doing and then slip in what we are doing at the end. You required a box. It had to be prominent. This is even more prominent. And it has to have the notice in there. And it's in there. There's 25 things there about how don't you support Donald Trump and aren't we great and shouldn't we make America great? Yes, but it's a distraction from what the... You didn't say we couldn't put 200,000 pages of distraction in there. And even if you wouldn't say that either, because Microsoft puts 200,000 pages of distraction in its terms of service things, so does everybody else in the industry. That's got to be okay, right? And I bet it will be when it gets to court. And unfortunately, they are, I guess, I'm sure they consider themselves real geniuses. We might consider them evil geniuses. But then again, the next section, the Gary and Garrett, or Jarrett, I'm not sure which, operation. It's a whole thing about the two consultants who run WinRed, and again, how they are being lauded by the American Association of Political Consultants instead of being thrown in the clink as they should be. There's much more to the article. You no doubt spent some time reading it over the weekend, but I think we've hit the highlights of what we wanted to yell and scream about on today's show. Tomorrow we'll be back to yell and scream about more things, and in the meantime, I think in a rather calm and rational voice, Justice Putnam will present to you the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next, right here on Netroots Radio, and you know the drill. He has a lot of stuff that he's going to tell you about, and I only left myself seconds to tell you about it.
NetrootsRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, he's definitely covering the Trump story, so he may do some yelling. We have more, of course. Asian American volunteers now organizing to protect elders in the wake of violent racist attacks we've heard so much about. Wisconsin seeking $145,000 in legal fees for Trump's bad faith election lawsuit. It's about time somebody started putting the screws to him for that. See you tomorrow.